Well, see, flamenco, I haven't talked, I'm just talking about touring now. Let's talk a little bit about that because people know me as a flamenco dancer. I consider myself as a dancer first because flamenco has always been a very, very important part of me. But I've loved choreography, the classics. I studied ballet all my life. I've done tap, I've done jazz. That is my primary, yes, flamenco. And flamenco was born as therapy. I did a chapter on that because why does flamenco hit people? What do you think? I know a lot of people here know this question because we've seen my little talks and stuff. But just an example, what city in the world has the most flamenco dance academies? Tokyo, Japan. Yeah. Yeah, it lets the I taught in Japan. It lets the people, I taught a little Roomba and I had them move in their hips. And it was like, oh my God, I'm out of free. Because Japanese people, we kind of think Japanese people are very observant. Yes, in their culture they are, but they got a lot of emotion. I've been to Japanese parties. I mean, they love something. And flamenco, and I'm envious of the teachers that are going to China now. I mean, they got thousands of students. They're making millions. Oh yeah, China has discovered flamenco. And look at how many Chinese people there are. I saw a clip of sevillanas, which is a main dance in Spanish flamenco folk of the South, called sevillanas. And I think there was probably 500 people on this street doing sevillanas. A couple of Spaniards went over there and taught, and they're all out there. I mean, it's amazing to see. But talking about that, I make a little joke out of it. Way before there were aspirin and Prozac for pain and everything, people cried and laughed and everything. And flamenco has that instant emotion. All the flamenco dancers, if you go before it became a performing art, is a people, a melting pot of people that, pretty amazing melting pot of people. Southern Spain flamenco, by the way, comes only from the bottom fifth of Spain, called Andalusia, Sevilla, Granada, Cadiz, Jerez. And so it's a melting pot of all kinds of cultures if you study any of it, past history. And it was born, really about the time of the Inquisition, which is a rough time, changing. 700-800 years of Moorish and Jewish and all kinds of cultures being, and I'm not getting into religion or politics, but it was a pretty rough time in Spain as the Catholic kings were coming back in. So these people, Spain, the flamenco, came out of that kind of like the blues. Most people that do history on flamenco relate it to blues, the black culture, slavery, whatever, and singing while you work, etc. So when I say that, before we could take a pill to feel good, people would cry, people would laugh. So almost all the flamenco dancers go through that range, and I try to talk interpretation when I teach too, because it's not just changing costume. Now the flamenco has become a performing art only in the last 150 years. From an area called the Café Cantantes, the singing cafes of 1850 on, more or less, from Seville, Granada, not so much in Granada, but Jerez and southern Spain. And so naturally there's an evolution in the dance where now, yeah, people have seen, they say, well, I've seen Dancing of the Stars. Well, it's not real flamenco there, but people are influenced by it. Let's face it, it's great. And, they're even in Spain, they're having those kind of contests now. So it's evolved, but if you study flamenco, there's really three absolutes in it, and that's learning the rhythm and the structure of the dances and the interpretation, because flamenco is strictly dance, song, guitar, and what's the cheer section called jaleo, where you see the clapping and the energy behind it. And this was all way before it became a performing art. people did it in their homes, in their patios, and out of the way family things. And it's still called, there's a word for it called a huerga. It's not a show. It's actually, we can have one here. It's non-paying. People get together to express. And jazz musicians, I worked 3 years in New Orleans, and I used to go to the jazz clubs. And after hours, and musicians would come in and they jam together. And flamenco's that way. There's no written music in flamenco. So what I'm getting at, I tried to capture that in my depth. That's what fascinated me, by the way. I'm not Spanish, but I had the fortune to work with the greatest artists from Spain and accepted because I followed that path of doing it right. And because you have to learn their culture. It's not just the gypsy culture. It's the Spanish Andalus culture that has given birth to flamenco. And once it touches you, because what it's touching, what is it touching? Are you afraid to cry if something happens? I mean, I still hear, oh, men don't cry. Why don't they? I cry a lot. I've cried, you know, and or laughed. Are you afraid to move your hips? I taught a class, there's a dance called rumba flamenca. You got to move your hips, you know. And it's just part of that. There's an awful lot of dances coming from what in Spanish is called ida y vuelta. Don't forget the Spaniards went out and came back. So Cuban, South America, Mexico, a lot of influence, mostly African influence, the upper body. Look at how close Africa is to Spain. So I taught it, and one time this woman said, I'll never forget it. I mean, you know, it sounds silly now, but I was teaching this at the end of a more serious class, just to loosen up. And she's like, I can't do that. And I said, don't worry, you won't get pregnant. I mean, I just came out. I don't know why. You know, because it was so silly, you know. You know, it's just that reality of letting yourself feel your emotions. That's what it's about. It's not mystery. People put mystery into flamenco. I try to take it out. It's learning the rhythm. It's like learning anything. I mean, if I went and took piano now, I mean, I don't read music that well, but it's a mystery to me. You know, doing what Papa Lucia does is a mystery to me.